archaeology here in 2003-04, and then did some very important work towards a PhD, which she completed at the University of Liverpool. Since Annie finished her academic research for her doctorate, she has worked consistently to try and understand how academic research into food and food history and social and cultural history can be brought together in a variety of ways, and particularly thinking about that in the context of heritage interpretation and presentation of historic sites. So we sometimes think of her as a food historian, but really she's a social and cultural historian who thinks about food in the context of heritage sites, buildings and spaces. And I know I've asked her to be refreshingly honest about her experiences of trying to uphold academic research in the face of media glare and attention, and you've probably heard her on radio before with Jay Rayner. So she does a lot of different contexts in which she tries to understand why what she's doing might be of interest and import to a variety of audiences. So Annie, thank you very much.
Are we sticking with these light levels? Are they perfect for you? Yeah. Marvellous. Right, can everybody hear me? Yes. Good. It's rare that people can't, but I think before we start, it's probably important to define terms. Public history, I would go with anything that you do as an academic or indeed informed amateur that might possibly impact on anyone who is not an academic or informed amateur. So within that, I would class anything to do with the media, which is the obvious bit of public history, anything that's written that can be read by a public audience and is not an academic journal, which, as you all know, sadly, no one reads. And anything, especially, which involves site visits or the public visiting history, usually in their spare time, where they will engage with it. So it's a huge, really, really wide field. I've also used the word foodways up there, partly because it was one of those lovely bits of jargon that I picked up during my masters, which I actually loathe because it's American. But I think it can be useful when you're thinking about more than just food. So not just what's on your plate, but how it is grown, how it is disposed of, what is used to cook with it, the whole range of things that would go with food, how it's eaten as well, so dining practices. I have quite a wide range of activities within the field of public history, as Kate has already mentioned. I think I cover off most of the major points where an academic could conceivably interact with somebody who is not an academic. So my biggest thing is a radio show on Radio 4 called The Kitchen Cabinet, which is made up of a panel of chefs and food writers and modern food people, and then a couple of experts as well as a food scientist, and I fulfill a sort of food history slot. It's lovely for me because I get to meet people like Angela Hartnett, who is a Michelin-star chef who's basically a goddess, and ask her how best to cook things, and then get to have free cocktails. But it's also very nice from my point of view as an academic who is major motivation is to try and get the public interested in food history, interested in history, and interested in, frankly, anything beyond X Factor. Because it means I am in something which is not a food history programme. I am in something where people are listening to it who are keen cooks, keen eaters, and I am on that, holding my head up high with people who are specialists in Japanese cuisine, Catalan cuisine, American cuisine, whatever it is. I'm on that footing. For me, the food of the past is the same as somebody who is a specialist in the food of Russia. They will say, oh, well, the best way to cook a turkey is like this because that's what they do in Siberia. And I would say, the best way to cook a turkey is this because that's what they did in the 18th century. It's one and the same thing. So to try and make this stuff relevant is really where I'm at. I also do a lot of public lecturing, a lot of public lecturing from now until Christmas. It's basically back-to-back Mrs. Beaton's Christmas lectures. I do a lot of public demonstrations in and out of costume, as you can see up there, and also I cook the food, which is one of the things that marks me out from many academics. Food history is one of those things where everybody knows what it is when you say food history, but no one can really define it academically. Many of you, I suspect, in this room have dealt with the data related to food and dining in your work as archaeologists or historians or whatever other field you're in. Many of you will have read historic recipes. Many of you will have watched certain television programmes and thought, yes, that has some relevance to my research. but you wouldn't call yourselves food historians just because you draw on the data relating to food and dining. Fine. You find a lot of food history comes out of literary studies, so a lot of people are studying, you know what it's like, you've exhausted the actual plot of the book, you've exhausted life writing, you've exhausted this, that, and the other, so let's look at some nitty-gritty. A lot of stuff is now looking at things like manuscript cookbooks as a form of biography, for example, so a way of women's life writing through a manuscript cookbook. There are various conferences where you will find a food element. There used to be, I don't know if it's still running, a food in archaeology conference, which is specifically a postgraduate conference at the University of Nottingham. So there is a sort of academic bent, and certainly the data sets are used an awful lot. Then there's the kind of quasi-academic food history world, which emerged really with Florence White's Things in England, and has emerged into a field which I would call basically incredibly up itself. You've got the Leeds Food Symposium and the Oxford Food Symposium, which used to be amazing, and the published volumes are just brilliant in that field. But today are perhaps, I think we'd like to say, a pale shadow of themselves. Both are now very cliquey, both are very much, well, especially Oxford was very much a place to be seen, full of Americans who want to go to evening war-style picnics on the banks of the Cherwell. I went to Oxford and walked out, I was so annoyed by it. But the volumes can be quite good, even if the papers are just 10 minutes long. Lots of crossover between people who I say are often academics in a field like English or history or material culture studies or journalism, whatever it is, that are specialising within that in food. And those people who should be classed among the leading academics of the country, but because they're not attached to a university, are in that sort of nebulous grey area somewhere to the side where no one takes them seriously because they haven't got University of Bognor Regis written underneath their name, and yet they are incredible. Ivan Day is probably the leading practitioner of food history in the country, and he's an incredibly knowledgeable man. And he has a PhD in botany actually. But because he sits outside academia, academics don't think of home. You have then the more popular side. This is sort of sliding scale. People like Lee Wilson, who is a journalist, who's published Considered For, which is very bestseller. But largely draws upon secondary research and the fact that she wants to enter one of Ivan's roasting courses. And yet that is the kind of public face of it. And then you've got people like the cooks at Hampton Court, who were started by Peter Greers, who's another sort of academic, non-academic. He used to work for Leeds Museum Service, York Museum Service, now retired, wrote the sort of seminal volume on cooking in medieval England. He started the team at Hampton Court. Now they bill themselves as food archaeologists working in practice on the foodways of the past. They dress in costume and make bread. But several of them are extremely knowledgeable on their topics. They do live research in front of the public. The last time I went there, Richard Fitch, who is one of the cooks there, was sitting there sieving various different flours through ever-decreasing bits of sieve that he had made in order to work out exactly what the consistency of the medieval flour grades, firsts, seconds, thirds, fourths, etc. were. So they are very, very knowledgeable, but most people just see man in costume making bread. So there's a huge range of experiences within food history, and I think it's very perilous sometimes to kind of make an absolute division between academia and practice. That said, most academics working within food history do not cook and eat the recipes, and I would say that is almost universal. I went to a conference in 2005 where I kind of joke entry, as I usually am, was the first speaker because no one ever knows what to put me. And it was an entire 2-day conference on reading and writing recipe books, since been published, as this book up here. Excellent volume it is. And I said at the beginning, so who's cooked from their sources? No one. And I thought, good Lord, there's 150 people here. Are you telling me you didn't cook? I mean, I get it if it's a medicinal recipe involving laudanum. But if it's a chicken pie, then why wouldn't you? And I think there is a huge gulf in a lot of cases between theory and practice when it comes to academia and the sort of practicing side of it, where academics could learn a lot from the non-academic side and vice versa. For example, and you'll see this on the way through, if you start cutting stuff up with a big knife, you start to realise an awful lot of things about the physicality of kitchens, about the time it takes to do things, about the way in which things have to be done, which you wouldn't work out otherwise. Earlier on this afternoon, I was talking about an example which I found in the York Castle Museum. I studied the jelly mould collection. Don't ever do that. And a lot of them have very telltale crack marks in the bottom of these ceramic jelly moulds. And I looked at them and thought, good Lord, look, we've got cracks. Marvellous. Forgot all about it. About 2 years later, I burnt the bottom out of a pudding basin while steaming Christmas pudding, set fire to the kitchen, melted the curtains, etc., etc. And when I eventually turned out to be burnt pudding and looked at the wreckage of my pudding basin, there were the telltale cracks on the bottom, which of course immediately shows that these ceramic jelly moulds are used for steaming pudding, straight away. And that several somebodies, burnt the bottom out of it. There is no difference between the 19th century cook with a ceramic jelly mould and me in my kitchen setting fire to things. So you do learn an awful lot through doing, and I think that the gap between theory and practice can actually be a bit of a dangerous one. Food history is very popular. I should probably apologise that nearly all the pictures in this presentation are of me, but there aren't very many of us doing this stuff, so anyway. Who saw Supersizers Go when it was on TV a few years ago? Did you like it?
Brilliant.
Excellent. Many food historians, and by many I mean the others, not very many, hated it because it was inaccurate and all the food was horrible. I thought it was one of the best things ever shown on British television, apart from Blackadder, because it was funny. They ate food, they got very, very drunk, and it was funny. And you know what? That is dinner. We do forget sometimes that history is about people, and that people go to the loo, and they get drunk, and they have sex in inappropriate places with inappropriate people, and they are sick after eating too much. And you know what? We're all people. So the Supersizers Go, for all that the food was apparently vile, which it shouldn't have been, was, I thought, brilliant. And a lot of people did get very interested in the idea of what we ate in the past through it. It also, of course, kick-started Sue Perkins' career as somebody who knew about historic food. There she is, dead drunk at the end of the Regency episode of Supersizers, begging the Wickham-alike to marry her because she is so plastered that she can barely see past the end of her nose, and she's also eaten a lot of cake. Great episode. Level of historical veracity there that I felt to be totally laudable. And there she is in the Great British Bake Off with me. And of course, those of you that watch the Great British Bake Off will be aware that they fill the programme with various historic slots, which, as the series have gone on, have become less and less accurate and more pants. Then you've got food history all over the rest of the shows that people like to watch. So Downton Abbey, which is about as inaccurate as it's possible to be. Why is she wearing earrings? And why does she have a sort of, 1990s wedding hairstyle? And why are there only 2 staff members in a kitchen for an earl? And why do they have a female cook in 1911? But let's not go there. And then there are the various books as well. Who Cooked Beef in Wellington? It's not very good. Great British Bake. I haven't read it. But there are other things like that. You don't get to publish a food history book unless you've been on telly. The problem with public perceptions of food history is that it doesn't go very deeply. And therefore, I would argue that aside from all the stuff on television, it is much, much better to get the public face to face and make sure they get it properly. The other problem with popular food history, and this underlies everything that you will do with food history, and it's not just a food history problem, it's a general historical problem, but it's particularly pertinent in the area of food, is the level of myth making. Who here has heard the myth that the Duchess of Bedford invented afternoon tea in 1842? They said it in that hotel. Rubbish. I mean, just put your brains into gear in 2 seconds and think about the fact that we all know tea was being consumed from about 1640 onwards. We've all heard about Jane Austen's bath and people going off and visiting and eating cake and having some tea in the afternoon. And how is that different to afternoon tea, which, by the way, wasn't called afternoon tea until the 1870s. So how was the Duchess of Bedford invented in 1842? Even Woburn Abbey don't claim that anymore. And yet, the number of people I've had ring me up and say, want to do an afternoon tea event about the Duchess of Bedford in 1842. And I say the words, rubbish. Sometimes I say the word bollocks. The other one, Simnel cake. Who here thinks that Simnel cake was cooked by servants, female servants, to take back to their mothers? And they were all given a day off from the country house that they worked in to travel the 300 or 400 miles back home on Mothering Sunday to visit their mothers, even though Mothering Sunday's got nothing to do with mothers and everything to do with pilgrimages to churches. I rest my case. There are so many myths within food history because we love food and we love myths, and the two go very well together. But sometimes it feels like I've spent the entire last 5 years basically trying to say to people, will you just think for 2 seconds about whether that can be true? And they go, Oh yeah. But it's easy to believe these things. And of course, for TV, we're always looking for the hook to draw in the public and want to present things that you would wish to spend an hour explaining in 2 minutes. You can see why these myths tend to overtake things. And it's one of the problems with working with any site, any venue, any client, anyone at all, is that they will have done their research by Googling it. And you will all have been told, at various points, that Wikipedia is not a valid research tool. But we all use it as a starting point, definitely. Just not use Wikipedia at any point as a starting point. Quite. We've just got to admit it, right? You all use Wikipedia. But very quickly, you learn to judge whether the Wikipedia entry is going to be actually of any use to you. You look at the references, you look at who's written it, you follow it through. It is a starting point only. And a very useful one sometimes, because it shows you what the rest of the world thinks before you have to go and tackle it. But, unfortunately, most of the time when you encounter anyone within the world of food history who is employing you, they will only have read Wikipedia and nothing else. But there are glimmers on the horizon. All of these sites, Audi End in Essex, Mansion House in York, Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, number 1 World Present in Bath, and Fairfax House in York, all of these have recently or are about to embark on quite a large, usually 8 to 11 funded project to reinterpret their kitchen spaces. Lots and lots of country houses in particular, but also townhouses, as you can see from Bath, are looking now at spaces of food preparation rather than food presentation as something which really can enhance the overall visitor experience. Not just because they want to show below-stairs spaces, that's been done for ages, but because they are increasingly recognising the potential of food to really tell a holistic story right across the entire place. That's great. Most of this presentation is about how not to do it today. All of these sites obviously are going to do it if they haven't already done it extremely well. But there are some common pitfalls when it comes to interpreting food history. This one is one of my favourites. That's actually a French site. It is the Musée Escoffier in Villeneuve-Loubet. The whole thing's an American money plunged into it. So when you go around it, you can find it. You've got this sort of incredibly sterile museum environment. Everything's very shiny. Lots of cages and cases and things. And then you go down to the basement and you're greeted with this. I think that's probably what the museum used to be like. It's certainly a reflection of quite a lot of French museums, unfortunately. And it's educational from a sort of museology point of view, but not a lot else. My favourite is actually, I think, the carrot. Is that any cake? I don't know what it's. This is a bucolic Christian picnic. Okay. Certainly 1973. Yeah, I think. Then you've got these 2 lovely ladies here. The muffin tops are particularly appropriate. There's a reason I didn't want the slides on the camera. Also, I'm not sure what they're wearing on their heads, but presumably they fried it. And this lady here in something which looks like curtains and certainly isn't what a cook in ye olde times would have been wearing. Neither is the table properly set dressed, what they're cooking is awful, I'm not sure why there are roses on the table, etc., etc., etc. The obvious common pitfalls are all there. If you walk into a historic site and it looks awful, you are immediately going to just assume that whatever the research that has been done is useless. You will not believe whatever happens. And the credibility problem is one of the real issues that you find. Sometimes, I mean, possibly all of these people, apart from the ones that are plastic, know an awful lot about what they're talking about. But if you as a visitor walk in and immediately think, good Lord, what is that? It doesn't matter how much they know. You're not going to listen to them. And if they do say it, you're going to disbelieve them, because frankly, anybody wearing that on their hat and their head is... Who's encountered costumed interpretation at various sites? And did you like it? Oh yes. Sometimes. Who's somewhat scared when they walk in somewhere and find someone in costume? Especially if the person in costume goes, hello! Or as I once saw at a visitor site, which was a medieval one, a group of very obviously foreign students with backpacks and all the rest of it, being harangued by an interpreter. Come, dance with this lady. You will dance with her and you will be engaged by the end of the night. You must dance with me. What are you doing? A, they don't speak any English. B, they're only watching and taking photographs. And C, just, what are you doing? Oh, absolutely dreadful. The basic pitfalls apart from myth peddling, but I think you can take that as read. Static scenes where you walk in and you go, oh, it's lovely, great, whatever. Really bad plastic food. You see that everywhere that people use food. Partly because there's nobody making decent food. There's one company that makes historic food, and it's often good, sometimes not. But if any of you are model makers and fancy an alternative career, there is a massive gap in the market for somebody who can make decent quality, historically accurate replica food that is not, this is a cake, and that is the cake you supply to every site, from medieval through to 1950. I kid you not. Poor quality costumes, if you're working in costume, whether it's on dummies at the side of the room, whether it's on cardboard cutouts, whatever it is, poor quality costume is an appalling problem. You go somewhere, you meet someone in a viscous dress with a zip up the back, you walk out. Doesn't matter what they're going to tell you, you're immediately turned off. Don't ever let anybody who is a member of an amateur dramatic society anywhere near your historic society costume. Ever. Ever. Amateur dramatic societies are about shagging and about letting out their inner self. Don't let them in a historic environment. Because I guarantee that no matter what information you give them, all they're interested in is the aforementioned shagging and letting themselves out. So don't do it. You just get, and also age inappropriate play acting, which we'll get onto it a bit later. I do know somebody who visited the site, which will remain nameless, who walked in once to find an 85-year-old in a pink viscous dress with the back. Who are you? And the 85-year-old went, sorry, I'm 15. It's very hard. I like to visit my great-grandmother on the weekend. Your great-grandmother's been dead for like 100 years. Give her a rest. I mean, the honest answer is you can always find roles you can play, but you've got to get over that hurdle straight away. And unstructured interpretation is the other massive pitfall, and this is where solid academic grounding really comes in helpful. How many places say to me, we want to do some costume interpretation because we want to bring it alive? What does that mean? You can bring it alive by releasing rats into the kitchen. People will be doing this. You know, bring it alive. What does it mean? What is the visitor leaving with? If they come in and they look and they go away and they think, that was nice, it's very alive, lovely. But if they come in and they look and they go away thinking, wow, I never knew that about 50 and 70, or gosh, I've really had to reevaluate the way in which I thought about my ancestors, or actually I'm going to try that recipe at home because the past is really relevant to me. Or even, wow, my ancestors were in service and now I have a better understanding of myself. All of these are valid outcomes. It was alive and looked nice. Frankly, in my view, is not. What you want is for the site to stay in people's minds, for the history to stay in people's minds. Partly because that's our job, I think, as public historians, and partly because if you can drive repeat visitors, they come back and spend their money, which means that you can actually increase site revenue, which means that some of these places can stay open. And I'm afraid to say that commercial imperative really does have to underlie everything you do, because if it doesn't, you'll be bust really quickly. Dining rooms. Really big area for static interpretation. Partly, I admit, because they are often very sensitive rooms in which you can do very little. Curatorially, you're not allowed to have real food, red wine, anything like that. But while these all look quite nice, and you walk into them and go, that's nice, unless you're me and a food nerd, you don't actually spend that much time in them. There are lots of things you can do with dining rooms to actually do something that's a bit different, whether it is briefing your room stewards, whether it's using smells, whether it's actually telling a story through the food, whether it's about half-finished glasses of wine, cutlery, that kind of thing. Mainly room stewards, and they nearly are all stewarded. But there isn't really, I think, a great deal now in the modern museums world to be said for this kind of just walk past it and have a look kind of interpretation. You're wasting a massive opportunity here, because food always tells stories. So just having it out, you are wasting a huge point where you could hammer home some stuff to people. Clinical kitchens. Kitchens are the big area at the moment. Often they contain tea rooms or the entrance hall or carpenters' workshops, that kind of thing. And a lot of the time they are very theoretical in terms of what they can do. This is the kitchen at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. As you can see, garages. This is the old roasting range, matron only. That's her parking space. And that's the scullery. There was a roasting kitchen that now has the boiler in, and the whole thing is riddled with asbestos. So it is very theoretical. That's what it used to look like, and that is what it is hoped to put it back to. Again, I would argue, and English Heritage are agreeing with me on this one, that putting it back to that is lovely. People can walk past one day when there's nothing going on and think, how lovely. Marvellous, got fans, like every other kitchen. And then they can move on. But how do you put that back to this? What else can you do? What if you can't buy all those copper pans? They're 500 quid each, and that's the little ones. You know, sometimes you cannot kit out a kitchen like this. And also, I would argue, sometimes there is no point. You can all, if you want to, go out tomorrow and visit a set-dressed historic kitchen full of copper pans. And they're all the same, because they always were. But let's look at what you can do that's different that actually helps to tell the stories of the house. That is a statically set-dressed classic kitchen at all the ends in Essex. That's what it looks like if you go there on a Monday or Tuesday, or possibly it's closed on Mondays and Tuesdays. If you went on a weekday anyway, you can see this. And lots of people come in and they're real kitchens and they go, what a lot of copper. And then they leave. And that's kind of it, really. However, if they come in and see this, it is slightly different. This is what I do, or a lot of what I do, and it's certainly what I did for a very long time. I ran the team at Audley End for about 8 years, working in kitchens in costume, and I'm going to talk a bit more about it afterwards. And although I'm actually not one of those people for once, this is kind of where I'm going with a lot of this. There are several different approaches to costume interpretation. This one, just snap poll. You walk into the kitchen, you go, wow, copper. Who finds this picture has more appeal than that one up there? This one? Who prefers that one? Oh, come on, there's like 2 hands there. People talking to each other, not talking to you, doing stuff, versus someone at a table basically demonstrating. Picture 1. Picture 2. Most people prefer picture 2. It's only for pure interest. Audley End, as you'll hear later, is set up to be sort of both, really. So you can walk in and just watch a scene. If you are terrified of costumed people, you can stand at the back and you can just watch. And you may or may not choose to get involved. They will probably throw rhetorical questions in your direction. Oh, madam, you would agree with me, wouldn't you? That kind of thing. So you can choose to be drawn in or not. But if you really want to be heavily interactive, you can also watch what amounts to a cooking demonstration, although it's never called a demonstration because frequently it goes wrong, so don't like to encourage people to stay. The other really big aspect of what happens at Audley End and what can happen in really well set up food history sites is historically accurate and challenging food. A number of times you'll go to country houses, and if there is real food on display, it's a cake. It's a cake! So what? We cook cakes today. Where is the difference between now cake and then cake? However, pigeon pie, with the feet sticking out of the top, is all about engagement, and the best way to engage people is to take them out of their comfort zone. You show people a picture of pie with feet coming out the top that looks like an alien trying to escape, and they nearly always go, oh my god, what's that? That's a question, and the question demands an answer, which means you can answer it, and immediately you've got them. You've got them where you want them, and you can take them anywhere you want to at that point. Live interpretation generally is, I think, a brilliant interpretive medium. These people are all professionals. You will see some who are not later on. It can be, at its best, fabulous. At its worst, it's probably the worst thing you can do to a site, and the quickest way to turn people off, I know. But if you've got good costumes, if you've got well-researched background packs, if people know what they're doing, and above all else, if everything they do is structured and has key interpretive aims, then it will be good. If you walk into Hampton Court, which is where this picture is, and you see these 2 ladies sitting on a bench, without even talking to them, you will learn something. You will learn about posture, you will learn about women, you will learn about women's rights just by looking at them, because any woman who has to do that doesn't have rights, can't move, no rights. You will learn a lot about the way in which women have activities, about high status dressing, about colour codes, about the way in which people even act and move around. The physicality of the past is something that I think as academics we often forget. For example, work in a kitchen in a corset. You will realise why the tables are the height they are, especially when mine aren't. A lot of interpretation can be very engaging because you're a person and people relate to people. So you can tell stories, you can make sure that you cater exactly to the person that you're talking to. Obviously that little lad has really enjoyed it. That man's going to enjoy it less. If you ever get a chance to see Peach the Fool in action, P-E-T, go. He is a brilliant, brilliant fool. He recently led, a couple of years ago, I think, danced from Wakefield to London, I think. And he also does a lot of activities with people with learning difficulties, playing on the word of a natural food, which is what the choosers, we think, call people with Down syndrome. He's amazing. He can get the public to do anything. He does child juggling. It's just incredible. But you can immediately engage people because apart from anything else, when you're wearing that and you're in a courtyard and it's 32 degrees above, someone will say to you, "Are you hot in that?" Really? Hot? I hadn't thought about hot. I'm wearing fur sleeves and it's sunny. Yes, I'm really hot. Not the right answer, by the way. Anybody who asks you a question, even if it's stupid, it's a way of opening. So live interpretation is something which I do a lot of, and I think it is a very, very good way to do things. And I'm not alone in that. This is 4 different websites that I just Googled kind of at random. I'm on 2 of them, sorry. I'm not supposed to be on that, but anyway, that's a really old picture. But you can see here, I mean, that's English Heritage, that's a theatre company that specialises in live interpretation and historic theatre for sites. Bath Preservation Trust, and there's a National Trust. They're all using people in costume. It is the great thing to do now. And it can be fun, but snap poll. Who here thinks that all of these people are professional? Who here thinks that some of these people are professional? And who thinks that all of them are volunteers? There's a mixture, but it is somewhat difficult to tell. This one. Which actually is cooked by the same people that cooked those. So those 2, volunteer or paid person? Yes, sad, isn't it? Somebody actually pays to have those produced at their site. Quite a lot of money as well. Paid or volunteer? The keys. I'm inspired actually. They were cooked by volunteers at Astley Park. Paid or volunteer? Paid. That was mine. All of these are the chaps at Hampton Court, are paid professionals, been doing what they do for absolute donkey's years. On here, this is an education volunteer, so slightly different in that she's paid, but everybody thinks that for education you can get away with much, much poorer costumes, research, and information in general. Not true, but people do think it's sadly. This lady, these people, and the green person there are the same teams are responsible for this, and they are a lack paid. Volunteers, but so is this lady. And although you can probably tell she's a volunteer by guessing because she's blatantly well past retirement age, her costume would certainly not give away the fact that she is, in fact, a volunteer. They're obviously volunteers, and all of this lot are professionals. The main giveaways are age and what they look like in their outfits. Put simply, are they wearing a corset or not? Do they have the telltale line across their boobs? Because if they do, they are almost certainly professionals. It's very difficult to get volunteers to wear a corset. What I want to do with this slide is really to show you that although when you are planning food history related events, it's great to use professionals if you can afford them, and there are massive advantages in terms of being able to recruit people of the right age, the right background, and to sack them when they muck up, it is not a guarantee of quality. You can pay people and get an appalling product, and obviously that's true across a wide range of things, but it's very true within food history, which is very, very niche. There are levels of participation to be thought of in all of these things. One of the biggest, I think it's not really a pitfall, it's the biggest question that people kind of come up with, is the idea that the public should be able to taste the historic food. Massive, massive alarm klaxons should sound in your head if you are ever working with food, with a site, and the clients want the public to taste. I would just say, the word no should appear really, really large in your head. It is not about health and safety. That is what people always think. Yes, to a small extent it is. If you're working in front of the public and you're cooking in front of the public, the chances are the public's fingers have been in whatever you're cooking, including their babies and their small children. So you wouldn't want them to eat it anyway. But it's more than that. The number of times I've been working in costume and people have been standing in front of me listening, engaged, thinking about what I'm saying. And the number of times I've witnessed with others doing that, the member of the public engaged in listening. But they're not like that when there's food. I'm listening to you, I'm no, to food! You've seen people at Waitrose on the free tasting bits, right? They do exactly that at historic sites. You will not get any information across if they can taste your food, so don't do it. The best way to do it is get a cafe, if there's a cafe on site, to cook historic recipes to your supplied recipes or somebody else's supplied recipes. They'll cock it up, incidentally, because they always do. System baking powder and cakes and evil things like that. But at least you can persuade the cafe to cook halfway decent historic food, then you can sell it to the public and gain that house profit margins. And it means that it's all cooked under nice food hygiene related things and all the rest of it. The other way you can manage to get engagement from the public in terms of edibility is either to let them watch you eat, which they hate, or to do recipe cards. And I always do recipe cards if I'm doing, whether it's a lecture with tastings or whether it's a historic cooking video. And one man said that it was best 10p years back. So the winner, I'd say the recipe cards were 30p, really annoyed me, but you can basically interpret anything you want to through food. The next pitfall is to just go, oh, I want to do some food. It is much better to start by saying, what do I want to interpret? What is my communication aim? For example, I want to put across the idea that Ickworth House was a hub, not just for the locality, but for the much, much wider environment. I want every member of the public at this site, and this is standard interpretation theory, so most of you will be familiar with it. I want everyone at my site to know that Ickworth was supplied by the garden, by the local village, by the local town, by London, and by much, much further afield places in the shape of things like tea plantations. That is your communication aim, therefore everything you do goes into it. You might decide it's about contextualising the landscape. I want everyone who's visiting this site through the medium of food, which is the best way to communicate there is, to know that all of the garden buildings and the entire landscape of this estate were linked. How are they linked? Well, we're going to explore that through the food. Thus, for example, you might say, I want them all to know the ice house had some form of role to play within the house. That is an ice house, fine, you interpret that through the kitchens, obviously through ice cream. There's another ice house. There's also a dairy in that complex. Or it might be about the wider landscape. Why does the landscape look like that? Well, because it's a really good thing if it looks like that, because you get deer, hares, pheasant, partridge, swans, larks, blackbirds, rooks, you name it, it's edible. Some of those you can't interpret in a live way. Wildlife Protection Act, 1984, remember it. Or you've got something like little temples. These two here are both tea houses. So this one is the tea bridge at the end, which was used for taking tea. So you have people in the kitchens and they're talking about tea taking and they're making it very, very clear that people are going to go out to the tea bridge to drink their tea. And when the public go out to the kitchen and see the bridge, the link is reinforced. They remember what they just learned. They actually learn something, which sometimes is novel. You can use appropriate set dressing. It doesn't have to be like interpretation. You can simply set dress certain communicated. This is my favourite interpretive device. It takes me 2 minutes to set up when I'm being in a kitchen. It is a pie. It's a normal pie, but it's stuffed with paper. And taxidermy heads. Oh, God, the ages to find taxidermy things. Pheasant head, pheasant wings, pheasant tail. They're all on sticks. You turn up, you put your pie on the table, you plonk your wings and your head in and your tail in, you stick it on the table. Then you get away with it, you drink tea or whatever else you're doing. Public walk in. Oh my God! There's a pie with a head in it! Oh, yes, madam. Well, how else do you present your pie? So unhygienic. It's done with taxidermy. You don't have that in your day? Of course I do. And then a discussion will ensue about techniques, presentation, notions of edibility, culturally conceived notions of what is and isn't acceptable at the table, and of course the very idea of literacy can come in as well. Well, how else would you know what you're eating, madam, if there isn't a head sticking out of it? The edible landscape can be presented graphically without any need for any people whatsoever. Unfortunately, all of these are real rather than plastic because nobody is in plastic. But you want to talk about vegetables. Everybody in the past ate like loaves of meat and no one ate any vegetables. Yeah, that's why everybody in the past died of scurvy. Not. So you might want to do something involving lots of vegetables, stuffed lettuces, a great big salad. You want to interpret the dairy, the landscape, the kind of outbuildings you put butter around. You want to have a look at decorative items on the table, the usage of fruit, the kitchen garden is the thing that you spent money on this year. You want to show it, therefore, in the house. You therefore do a bowl of cornucopia of fruit in jelly. You want to show the edible landscape in the shape of birds. Well, who's going to mistake that for a pheasant? It's got its head on. Oh yeah, there's a hair there. Apples in rice. The rice is there because it's deliberately provocative. Nobody had rice in the past. Really? Where did rice pudding come from? If you answer like that, obviously they hate you. pig's pettitoes on a bed of heart, liver and lights all chopped up. These dishes are often deliberately provocative. They are deliberately asking people to ask questions, to react. And a lot of what I learned about how to provoke the public, I learned at the end. This is how it is presented to the wider public, sort of, the usual tropes of domestic service life, and it's a beautiful, beautiful house. And the project there has been running since 2008. It initially started as, let's bring the kitchens alive, and then they put me in charge of it. And it stopped being, let's bring the kitchens alive, and started being, let's interpret the house in a really, really clever way, and let's basically entirely take my PhD out into this. I was running this at the same time as doing a PhD, doing ever till the HF that. This, I think, sums up the audience experience. You've got somebody listening to a member of the public who's telling them something and they will be engaged in a conversation, while you've also got somebody sitting and drinking tea. We do a lot of drinking tea. But they are doing something which can be watched, so the public can choose whether they are watching and learning by watching, or actively engaging and engaging by having a discussion. Now, at Audley End, everybody is nominally in character, so if someone says to you, where are, I don't know, theory, you have to say, ooh, in practice you go over there. And actually there's always a fluidity. The worst thing you can do if you've got someone working in costume is say to them, be in character, do not admit it. Someone points a camera at them. It is a gremlin, oh please, everybody knows me 2014. Someone points a camera at you, just take a photograph and you say, of course, would you like me to pose with you? Much, much better. So there is always a sort of dialogue, I suppose. Everything at Audley End is underlain by the work I was doing my PhD. In fact, Audley End was a massive case study in my PhD because it's the only way I could justify working there so much. Thus, every single day the recipes are planned out, and every single recipe has interpretive notes with it. This is the Christmas pack from Audley for 2012, and it is broken down by overall aims, learning objectives, interpretive approach, the characters. Everybody who works at that site submits a 2-page synopsis of their character, so that when people are in character, they can read everybody else's synopsis and know how they would react and how they would behave, so it makes it a lot more realistic. Every single recipe says on it, these are the interpretive points. There is not a single recipe that is cooked in that kitchen which is cooked because it brings the room alive. And you have to think of an awful lot of things, like seasonality, budget, a massive, massive issue, because there always is one. And in this case, nobody thought about who was going to replace the wood with fire, for example. Oops, that's quite a lot of money here. So all of these things need to be thought about, and all of the recipes need to plan to take into account that. But if you are doing something that's the most exciting thing ever in your PhD, and you're cooking it in front of the public, and they say, yeah, what's that about? And you talk to them and you realise you actually just cracked a really thorny problem that you were studying by having to make it accessible. It's a brilliant feeling. A lot of the recipes at Audley were chosen to provoke. There is your graphic example of butchery for those who were waiting for it. Lamb's head, I only ever complained about that, Lisa was traumatised. Well, it's strong, isn't it? But Lamb's head curry was an Easter event, which I think I wrote the tagline for, and it said something like, fluffy little bummies and gambling lambs and cute little chicks. The goodness of Easter is here, and Mrs. Crinkle's turning it into dinner. Okay, it amused me quite a lot. But of course, having said that, we then had to turn it into dinner, which meant cooking chicken and rabbit and water. That was a lamb's head, and it made this lamb's head curry. It took 4 days. There are brain fritters, the ears have been deep fried. It was epic. But my God, was it good fun to do, and my God, did we learn. You have not lived till you smelt ears being singed out of a measuring window while you're in full costume with a cook's blowtorch. Game week was one of the things I was proudest of there. Lots and lots of country councils just cook cake. We decided to cook game because it's a fundamental part of the English country landscape. Because people do not realise that all those capability brown landscapes are set up mainly for composite and meat. Because people just do not think about the work that went into food in the past. So we spent a week skinning and gutting and plucking and doing all of this in front of the public, and they loved it. Anyone who says you can't do it because people are squeamish, no, they're not if it's done in the right way. If we chased them around the room with a dead pheasant, they would have hated it. But a simple, well-mannered discussion, which is just factual, always engages people, even if they're vegetarian. And again, with the shock tactics, the roast hare, it's great, because people go, why would you do that? And you say, how else do you know it's not cat? Sorry. Let's say that. But anyway, the hair, you can go anywhere. As an example of a dish, people come in, what is that? It's a hair. Why is it like that? Well, how else would you present it? Again, you can, if you want to discuss the class system, you discuss it from the hair. You want to discuss land management, you discuss it from the hair. You want to discuss notions, culturally conceived notions of edibility, you discuss it from the hair. You want to discuss gender notions in the past, you do it from the hair, because the hair would have been on the male end of the table, while the woman would have had farmed meat, probably chicken or perhaps lamb in front of her, to denote her essential gentility, whereas the man would have had the hair in front of him, because in the 18th century. So just by telling the public that, you've immediately told them something about gender in the past. Then you can go on to explore other gender conventions, women's rights. You know, there is no limit. You start with a hair, you end up with a discussion of suffrage. It's brilliant. Christmas is one of those events that comes around every year for about 5 months and can be intrinsically tedious. However, if you interpret the entire house to a medium of food, it's not boring anymore. Because obviously I was running it, so the entire thing is centered around Christmas dinner and feasting. We had people running up and downstairs because the currents had gone missing. We had the aristocracy upstairs reenacting bits of Scrooge, all the food bits, running to the kitchen to borrow oranges to do the scene where Scrooge walks along the street. We had people coming to the kitchen and going, "How would Bob Cratchit have cooked his turkey?" And then running away again. So again, people were forced to think about interactions between servants and served, the way in which the house worked, who was allowed to go into different spaces, and they got to watch a little play. Great. Plus, we got to demolish the cake at the end, which is one of my favourite bits. To give you one example of a single recipe from start to finish, this is probably the most exotic thing I've ever cooked at a country house. The boar's head was the dish that Christmas. So upstairs, they're going on about the boar's head. Can't hold a boar anymore. Only the Queen can get a boar. So unfair. Just because she's got cousins in Germany. Well, you know, like our cousins being the king of Germany. Yeah, I know, but like, seriously. Downstairs, meanwhile, we were preparing the boar's head. Took 2 weeks. Can't get boar. Procure the face of the bacon hole, says the recipe. So we did. That was what we started with. Those are what we were aiming at. That's what we did. Most of this was filmed in my kitchen, so that's why I'm using a washing up tub rather than, because there were public around, so you can't take photographs. But you skin it, you brine it for 2 weeks, you turn it every day for 2 weeks. Great. Look at this, public. You sew the eyelid shut and the jaw shut and the nose shut. Otherwise, when you stuff it, it weeps meat. You stuff it, as you can see there. You swaddle it, as you can see there, and that's actual size, obviously. You boil it for 5 hours overnight in the biggest pan you've ever seen in your entire life, in your house, till the walls are running with fat and smeg. You pull it out, and it looks like that, and you think, oh, Christ. What am I doing? Seriously, it's just never going to happen. And little boy comes in and goes, ugh! And you go, but then you pipe it with lard and you decorate it up and you spend a day pimping the boar's head. Whoops! And then you flick too fast. You end up with that. This one is the first one I did. That one is a catered version from 1930, and that's the one we did at Aubrey that year. And you can see the wow factor is incredible. And a lot of people, when you're doing food and you're doing it in real time, come back. They come back throughout the day. It increases dwell time. It's brilliant because increased dwell time means increased spend per head in the cafe, which means that the site's profits goes up, which means that everybody is happy. But it does look good. The other one I've been involved in a lot is Ickworth, which is a volunteer-led project. They did what you must do, going to work with volunteers, a food history project, which is to go out and recruit specific volunteers. If you just say to people who are already working on the site, come, cook, they take all of their prejudices and all of their ingrained behaviours with them. Whereas if you set up a new project and say, these are the parameters, these are the rules, no, you're in the natural dramatic society, get out. Then you can control it much, much better. And Ickworth is a brilliant project because they works in tandem with the local drama college and with a lot of the local schools to specifically recruit younger people. It'll be great on our CV. And it will. All of the volunteers were immediately involved in all the publicity, so do not have volunteers provide the interpretation and then use a professional company to do all the photography because that really sucks. And I would say this sums up the experience at Ickworth. At Ickworth, they don't talk to the public. If you go to Ickworth, you will see ghosts. It's an approach. In many ways, it's a better approach than having people talk directly to the public, which does require a particular set of skills, as Lynn recently said. Whereas here, everybody is very much imbued in the project. And they have a massive amount of research which I gave to them, and they really got with it. They're not playing real characters, although they are playing real characters, because 1930s is a tad close to the modern day. If you start playing someone's grandmother as a snapper, and they come in and go, but it wasn't like that! It's a little bit awkward. And you never know where these things will take you. The volunteers at Ickworth were given proper training in historic cookery. They were used for the AV that greets you as you walk into the house, so they feel very involved with what was going on. And they've always been used as an integral part of the publicity, but the main thing is they are their own team. Some of them did work in the house before, but they all went through a fairly rigorous interview process in order to be allowed to work in the basement. And it's not just kitchens there, it's the whole basement area, so there are housemaids and there are housekeepers and butlers and visiting valets and stuff like that. As you can see from the picture of the cooks, there's not a lot of youth going on there. This girl is, I think, in her early 30s, and this lady here is in her mid-30s. Most of the others are well past the age when they would have been retired off, and probably dead, actually. But, obviously, you have to cast the whole range in the kitchen, which means you play Mrs. Harris from the village, because there's nearly always an old crone that comes in to help out in these places, so that is what they play. They are not playing 18-year-olds. We had a lot of problems at Ickworth because a lot of the cooks were ex-domestic science teachers. And at the beginning, they all just wanted to cook individual things. They wanted to show off their own skill. And one of the things that's absolutely key is to start with a roster of 20 recipes, all of which have their interpretive points, and all of the people can cook them. And you then enforce breaks like crazy. And then if someone leaves, the next person can pick up on what they're doing. Trying to get people to understand that food is just a tool. The communication of the interpretive aims of the house is very difficult. Most people regard the food as an end in itself, and it cannot be. That is an absolute no. There are also pitfalls to working volunteers along the costume lines. 1930s. Yes, if you are over the age of about 25, you're probably still wearing a corset. If you're under the age of about 25, you're wearing a girdle. It's much evidence of girdles here. One day I'll get those Spanx. The other problem is that you have to have someone to enforce things all the time. Otherwise, things like the Velcro sandal creep in. Yes. And the modern bomb, and the modern glasses, and the wedding rings, and the makeup. You start a project like this by being very nasty to people and standing up and saying there will be no makeup apart from a little bit of concealer, all right, fine, but otherwise it gets some caps and you look stupid. There will be no makeup, there will be no jewellery. If you wear glasses, then please try and wear contacts. Do you really need them? I can't read without them, or somebody else will tell you the recipe. Because actually, again, it's about credibility. You walk into a site, you see someone with their modern bob, their huge bob cap, all their bling on, probably painted nails as well, and you think, what are they going to tell me that I don't know already? Blatantly, they're not really making much of an effort, are they? And you move on. Whereas actually, all of the people at Ickworth know an awful lot. And they are a brilliant team. This is their foundation document. They have allocated breaks. They have it's complicated. It's not actually that bad. The day's divided up into quarter-of-an-hour phases, and they spend a quarter of an hour doing one thing, they move on to another thing, and then they move on to another thing, etc., etc. Built into the day's leisure time as well. This stuff is knackering, especially if you're a volunteer, especially if you're an older person. So you need to build into the day time to sit down. And the leisure aspect at Ickworth has been built into the day. So as a member of the public, at any one time, you always find someone in the servants' hall having a cup of tea, reading a cinema magazine, trying out new hairstyles in the mirror, writing letters, playing games, playing the piano. There were two beautiful young girls from a local school who just played, they were like angels on the piano. And every time they had their breaks, they used to sit and play duets together of Victorian musical songs which they learned. And of course, as a member of the public, you hear the noise, sound, smell, ambience, all really important, all non-verbal interpretation, all really, really lovely. And it did, one of the things about working with volunteers rather than professionals is it actually brings the team together. And the volunteers themselves learn from it in a way that it's professional. You don't have to care if they learn from it as long as they do their job. But they really, really did. And they made friends, they're a really close-knit team, they go out for a Christmas meal together. It's an amazing atmosphere now when you go down there. And actually one that I feel very proud to have been involved with. And then a final case study is Jelly Mania, just to show that you don't have to be in costume, that you can use food anyway. This one is Kew Palace. As you can see, the theme that we decided for ourselves was cooking doesn't get tougher than this. It was me and two mates, actually, in chef's blacks. So we opted for no costume. We didn't want to distract the public from the event in hand. The theme was quite simply jelly. And the major overall interpretive aim was jelly is not just for children. So I wanted every single person who visited that site to go away thinking, my God, jelly is like the most sophisticated food you can imagine. And they did. Also, because it was me, and because I always want people to compare and contrast, I think one of the most brilliant ways to learn in terms of history is to be forced to contrast things with your own day. I have no trouble whatsoever with the antiquarian approach to food history, which is, well, it's clever, but you can't do it now. Of course you can do it now, you just do it differently. The idea that you should put this up on a pedestal and not learn from it and not want to do it yourself is a shame. So we had lots of displays like this one, how to colour jelly. 1714, some carrots and some spinach. 2014, 3 bottles of food dye. And the idea was to get people to engage with why jelly was not just for children, because of course in the past it was so much more difficult to do. Also, a bloody great cast that's sitting on the side has a certain level of impact, especially when it's the summer and it's covered in flies. Well, yeah, we had to cover it in the end and then throw it out. But anyway, you can see that the activities that went on range from just making the jellies, everyone in ice. Again, immediately people don't think about setting jellies. So, oh look, ice. Wow, people had ice. Yes, let's talk about the wider landscape of Kew Gardens. Have you visited the ice camps yet? Well, let's think about that. Where did you think the ice came from? Let's talk about how brilliant people were in the past. But also, there's this food colouring going on, which is great for children, because although you can spinach, you bring it through a butter muslin, and way green colouring, which you then use to make asparagus jelly, and it's a really beautiful green. We did bacon and eggs in jelly, transparent puddings, playing cards in flummery, all sorts of bits and pieces, much of which was pre-prepared so that we could have it out and wobble it, because there is something beautiful about the wobble. It was a great event, and one of the ones where I think all of the interpretive aims were achieved. It was great because everybody I used for it knew what they were doing, but they can still be wonderful. There are, of course, other uses of food history which I haven't talked about at all because I've dwelt simply on one aspect. 45 minutes is not an hour, is not long enough to cover everything. But I use food history for lecturing. I find it's a really good way to hook people in. Most of my lectures have exciting titles like Flatulence and Phlegm, that salad, which is some of them are very rude and involve a lot of pictures of people vomiting. So always good. I do things in costume, I do things not in costume, I do demonstrations, not demonstrations. It's always a good hook. People come to hear about food. And the other thing, of course, you can do is historic banquets. That one is a suckling pig's head, which actually wasn't a historic banquet, but I took it apart because I was interested to eat the snout, which was a delicacy, and it was really nice. So I'd recommend, if you ever get a suckling pig, to just grab the head, loads of it, and then you can spend ages with the bloke who's a professor in medicine at Cambridge opposite you, poking. What am I doing? We were quite drunk. So in conclusion, I would say food is brilliant. You can do anything you want to through it. It's the best interpretive medium there is. You can tell stories, you can focus it, you can do public interpretation par excellence. But it's actually quite difficult to do. Everyone eats, which means that you can engage everyone, even the anorexic in the corner, who is just standing there. Yeah, well, they've chosen to be anorexic, haven't they? So they've got an opinion, and actually usually you can shock them. It's like a 13-year-old in tears. Wait. Come on, she was really pathetic. All I had was a stuffed rabbit. Talking about tudor food. Which or poor, it was schools event. Tudor food, rich or poor. One table's got salt corn, acorns, and beans on, and one table's got rabbits, that kind of thing. Sugar, spices. She comes in. Oh, there's a rabbit! Yeah. Is it real? Well, it was real when I started. Oh, no, pet rabbit. Have you eaten it? No. I explained to her when envisaging eating her rabbit, because obviously it was probably going to be fed on crap. But no, it's not one of it. But the best thing about those sessions was that somebody would always react like that. And then you would say to them, all right, well, who's eating rabbit? And the person who'd react would go, no one eats rabbit! And quite a few hands would go up. And you'd say, and who's been out shooting? And quite a few hands would go up. This was rural Essex. And the person who had made the fuss was suddenly forced to contemplate the fact that actually nobody thought like them. And at the age of 13, that's quite a valuable life lesson. But it is quite easy to turn people off or disengage them. I think food-based interpretation is brilliant. It can be very, very engaging. There are lots of stories to tell. It's very visceral. It's great fun. but it can also be the worst thing in the world ever. If it's done badly, there's just an point there. Done well, the world is quite frankly your oyster. And that's what happens when you leave your food history to go negative. So, yes, the end. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Annie. And you can imagine what it was like having Annie as a master's student in the department, and the famous hot chocolate seminar that she ran as part of the historical archaeology session has gone down in the annals of the department. That's fantastic. So you've really brought your passion and distinctive style for this to our attention, made us really think. So are there some questions for Annie about your experiences, about questions that she's raised?
You have to order pig's heads for your butchers if that's what you do. Getting cut back at 7 vertebrae, otherwise you can't,
Do you find with sort of the uses of animal, which is obviously one of the biggest sort of shock factor things, do you get sort of different cultural sort of, people from different countries coming in and commenting interesting points?
Yeah, you do. I mean, the other sort of deliberately provocative thing I tend to use is unusual vegetables. So medlars, cardoons, varieties of apples people wouldn't have seen. Things from the kitchen, because in the kitchen garden it's great because you can get them through the vegetables too. But yes, I mean, when we were doing jelly mania, we had a Jewish family in, who said, wow, this is how we make jelly with a calf's foot. Because we're not allowed to eat pig products, and all modern gelatin is founded on pork gelatin, pig gelatin. So they were completely fine with the calf's foot and had an interesting discussion with the other members of the public, which is what can happen. The French are completely unsqueamish and don't really care. Because, France, but Spain, rabbits and hares are still sold with their heads on precisely because so many people pass them on as cat. So you do get a culture. I mean, the audience for most of these things, let's face it, is white, middle class, middle-aged Britons, and it's very hard to reach the same question right across heritage. How do you reach disenfranchised, non-traditional groups? And you can do it, and it can be very rewarding. We did an event in Great Yarmouth, which is a horrible, horrible place. Sorry. And we were working with a group, sort of troubled pre-teens, ones who I think had sort of various juvie problems. And they were compiling a cookbook of recipes pertinent to Great Yarmouth and historic recipes as part of the sort of remedial work they did. So they asked me if they could have a recipe, and I said, well, we want curry, thinking, well, it was prawn curry, so it used local ingredients, it was exotic and spicy, and it was something that I felt might chime with some of the stuff that some of these kids who were predominantly from ethnic backgrounds were eating at home. And it was brilliant. It was a fabulous day because the kids responded so well. I didn't know you had spice, that's like what we have. Oh my god, and then they went on to say, oh, you didn't have curry though right then, did you? Yes! Curry's great to cook because everybody always thinks it's a 1960s invention. So you do get interesting reactions, and I think one of the things that is another pitfall is sending people out to do this without the requisite level of information. You've got to feel it's terrifying being in front of the public when they can ask you anything. And you can't say, because you're not doing character, you can't go, I don't know. You can say, I'm not really sure, but basically you have to be omnipotent, which means that it can be brilliant. But you do see, a lot of different reactions depending on who people are. And you always get the, I'm a vegetarian, I wouldn't survive question, at which point you can talk about Thomas Treon and religious vegetarians, and you can say, well, man, if you eat beef, how do you possibly be British? If they're there, you can have a lot of fun with them. Hate being friendly with us. Steve.
I'll sort of play devil's advocate. I really hate costumes, and it doesn't matter how good or bad it is. When I see something in costume, I just want to run it out straight away. So first, am I weird? There are a lot of people like me. If there are a lot of people like me, how does do you think that what you gain from actually dressing up so you can get the kind of experiential element, the kind of physicality, does that outweigh that instant turn off that people get when they just see someone in costume?
I think it does. I think you are in a minority, certainly. Generally, and the problem with a lot of historic sites is they put you in costume because they're essentially going down. And that is a problem. The Disneyfication of culture and the idea that if someone's in costume, it somehow makes it cooler, is an issue. If you were to come to a site, for example, which I was running, or if I was in it, it would be obvious from your reaction that you didn't like this. You would be physically showing by your body language you weren't engaged. I would either not engage you, in which case you would have the same visitor experience as anybody else would if people in costume weren't there. Your kitchen's still there, dining room's still there, you can get out of it what you want to. It is very much an opt-in experience. But it may well be, and this is what I would hope, that as you walked around looking at the things that were interesting you, you'd be listening to what I'd be saying. And certainly at somewhere like Audley or Bath, or wherever I work in costume, you can have very, very intimate conversations with people if there's only a couple of people in the room. Someone else walks in, but you raise your voice. You make sure they can hear what you're saying because the information you're giving is certainly right. And you as an intelligent man who actually knows a lot of stuff about this, hopefully would think, actually that's quite interesting. Maybe I'll go and talk to this person. And because you're turned off by the whole thing, I wouldn't even bother to try and be in character with you. It's not fair on you. We would just have a conversation. I happen to be in costume. Well, you know what, I can be wearing Ugg boots and like a little lace dress. Frankly, it's more ridiculous than Victorian stuff. So at that point, the costume doesn't become an issue. And good interpretation should be like that. But I agree, there's a lot of bad stuff around, and you do find people who really hate it. And you just have to be sensitive to the people that do hate it if you're working in it. I still think it's a very good means of doing it, but there are huge pitfalls in it, and you cannot pretend that there aren't, and that is one of them.
You think that if you were to do the same thing but not in costume, is the difference then, is it about engagement or is it about actually becoming a thing?
I think it's both. The Jelly Mania event we did, I really liked not being in costume because it put all the focus on food, which obviously is where I'm coming from. I started working in costume, but not with food. I was at Hampton Court being Catherine Parr, Anne Boleyn, that kind of thing. And there the costume was like food, it's a tool. It is a way of getting people to come and talk to you. Because most people will come up to you and they'll fondle your fabric, or they'll, if they're bloke, they'll look down your cleavage because you can't avoid it. And well done, how original. And sometimes take photographs of the skirt. And that is a tool to get people to come and speak to you. So the extension of that into food work is something that sideswapped rather than necessarily being my choice all the time. Working out of costume is in many ways much more rewarding, but it can be much more difficult because you haven't got a costume to fall back on. You haven't got a way of immediately engaging people. So you have to be that much more out there. You have to be much more of a performer if you're not in costume, because you have to be totally aware of the nuances of people as they come in, their body language. You have to make eye contact with everyone. You have to give them a non-verbal invitation to come and talk to you if you're not working in costume, which sometimes if you are in costume you don't need, because they understand that by being in costume you're a target and they can come and talk to you or take photographs of you or whatever it is.
I wanted to ask Annie about that first versus third person, because I think you seem to have suggested that there is that flexibility around moving register at a lot of sites, and that's one of the skills of a costume interpreter, is to work out when it is and isn't appropriate. But do you find that there's a reluctance of properties to, is there a prevailing preference? I know in the literature there's a kind of reaction against first person interpretation and a preference for third person, in some way because that's more scholarly, in some ways that's...
I think it's more about that the volunteers are not very happy with that level. A lot of the sites that use this are National Trust sites or other predominantly volunteer-run sites. And most of them are not happy with inhabiting a character. It also requires a level of research that you would, and I always say don't play a real person if you're not sure, because at least how you can fall back on what you know. It is much easier to be in first person if there are lots of you, because you can create the first person atmosphere by talking to your fellow interpreters, and then you can come out of it. I mean, some people really want to play. I remember one of the best incidents I ever had at a historic site was a little girl about 10. Who really got that we were in character, and she was a sister. Fine. And 10-year-old was talking to me about why I didn't have the vote. It was, we'd gone on from food. And I was saying, well, I don't really want the vote because I'm in 1881. Constantly saying, I'm in 1881. And I said, well, I just have to do what my employer told me, wouldn't I? Well, no, well, I would, because exactly. How would you know? Oh, come on. And I said, I think women shouldn't have the vote. I mean, if someone needs to sit outside the political system, be able to critique it. And that being, you've got all the usual arguments for the anti-suffrage movement from a female point of view. And she was really annoyed by this. And our little sister kept going, but don't you watch television? Shh, she doesn't know about that yet. And it's great. The best best bit of it was she ran out of the room and she came back and said, look, Marianne, I'm in 2000 and whatever it was, and I'm going to go to university because women can. And I'm going to go to university, and I'm going to Cambridge, and I'm going to do science, and I'm going to invent a time machine, and I'm going to come back to 1881, I'm going to pick you up, I'm going to take you to the future, I'm going to show you. Really, and I just thought, this is something she'll remember forever. And I wouldn't have got that from not being in character. But equally, I couldn't have been in character for my fellow interpreters' work. And if I'm working on my own, the public don't want it. The public don't expect it because they're not used to costume interpretation, and I flick. So what I normally say is, I say, you know, I'm representing somebody, or I'm dressed as somebody. I'm dressed as the cook here in 1881. And if people want to play it, because you do get them, they're like really keen. So, how do you go to Louis 1780? No knickers. Move on. You know, and then you can engage them if that's what they want to do. But I think that it is easier to be in third person, and it is less often in the public sometimes. But done well, first person can be great. But again, done badly, it's really, 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 really awful.
Okay. Well, Annie, you have entertained us as ever, and you have made us think about a really interesting intersection here between so many of the things that interest the department: heritage, the bigger social and cultural historical questions, science, food, and we will not forget this presentation and graphic images of that poor hair. And can I ask you to join me in thanking Annie for a fantastic
Next Tuesday,
next Tuesday.
we have Carsten Muller from the North Region Heritage Agency.
So
We have especially from Oslo.
So please do join us. More wine, more good conversation, more thoughts. Okay,